And let's go to the notes. And what the way I want to start this out is that these two groups right here, and actually we'll talk about three groups really, um, are groups of people that were offered some kind of help to immigrants. Just imagine that it is, sometime in the late 1800s, and you are coming over on the boat, and odds are that you know very little English, maybe some, maybe none, right? You don't have a job lined up. You might have family in the country, but they probably are not in New York City where you landed, right? And you don't have citizenship. You don't have a place to live, right? And you're probably scared, probably, right? And you probably have your family with you and your little kids. You're like, what am I going to do? And there's a person who comes up to you and they say, I'm from the local ward boss. If you don't know what a ward boss is yet, you will in just a few minutes, right? And I will get you a place to live. I'll get you coal in winter. I'll get your kids into school. I'll get you registered to vote and citizenship, and I'll get you a job and a place to stay. All you need to do is say is vote for who we ask you to vote for. I think almost all of us, right? Probably, if you were in that position, would probably take that deal, right? Okay, and that's what the political machine was all about, and that was awesome. But we'll find out that those were horribly corrupt. We'll look at the other group, the Full Social Gospel and the Southern Cross movement, who didn't want anything to do. Right? So let's look at them. Let's don't make me get mad at you. All right, urbanization. Let's look at that first. Urbanization just means rapid city growth. Oh, it's not working because I don't have it plugged in. Derp. Rapid city growth. That means that just means what it means. That cities are growing very fast. But what is not in that little definition right there is the assumption that cities are growing during the industrial era too fast for the police to keep up, for hospitals to keep up, for sanitation to keep up, for fire departments to keep up, social services in general, right, and city governments. And so urbanization causes a lot of problems. Now, urbanization was fueled by at least three things, and one of them we've talked about immigration. People are coming from other countries to our big cities, and that's making the cities grow big. Now, if you did your work yesterday, then you would have seen two other reasons why cities are growing big in the United States, and they're not. This reason does not have to do with people coming from other countries. It's internal migration inside the U.S. When you tell me, describe to me those two things. Yeah, give me one.
I was going to give an example of internal migration.
Yes, please.
The Great Migration.
Great migration. Who's moving and where to?
We were African Americans, and it was from the South.
Right? They are going from the rural south to the urban north. They're escaping something. Something's pushing them out of the south, and what is drawing them to the north is the factory jobs. Right? That's one internal migration. What was the other internal migration that's going on? You know it. You just gotta. What? Royal to urban?
To like the farm, to
Well, no, say the word right.
the rural areas, to the urban
You were
areas.
so close. This is what you said. Close.
I said rural.
No, you didn't. You said
Yeah,
rural.
rural.
There, that's better. Rural. There you go. I'm picking on you, Slater. I promise. No, you're right. It's in this case mostly white farmers, citizens moving from the countryside to the city, right? And all of these together are making cities grow really fast. Now, when immigrants came over, a lot of times they would live in what were called ethnic enclaves. Oh, and yes, just ignore that line that's down below. You can see, if you look at the very top, I made this in 2004. And I keep this. Most of the stuff that I have from then is gone, right? I've revamped it and so, but I keep this because I'm proud of it, or I'm just going to show off that I kept something from 2004. I know it's only been almost 20 years, but whatever. I don't care. What was I talking about? Ethnic enclaves. An enclave is, another word for it is neighborhood. In the content statement, you put ethnic neighborhoods yesterday. But that's not really what an enclave is. It's not just a neighborhood. It's like a sanctuary. It's like a place where immigrants can go to feel safe because they're around people who are like them. Now, can you think of any examples of any ethnic enclaves anywhere in the United States? Yeah. Like the specific names of neighborhoods that are ethnic enclaves.
Like
Chinatown is a perfect example. And there are several Chinatowns across the country, the most famous of them being New York and San Francisco. No one? Yeah. Like that's one that's here. Now, Little Italy is also in New York City. There are enclaves of Jewish settlers, but since Jewish people come from all different countries, you know that gets kind of mixed up. There's a lot of synagogues located in New York City. In our neck of the woods, German village. That's where people who were German came and they settled in that part of Columbus to find factory jobs during the industrial era, right? By the way, how many of you go to German village on at least a semi-regular basis? Okay, good, good. You should, right? Because there's some awesome things there. Like the book law. Isn't it amazing? If you haven't been there, it's a really big house. It's like a maze, and it's full of books. We talked about it. And if you like to read, then great. If you don't like to read, then just go because next door is a coffee shop called Stoltz, and it's awesome. Right? What else do you know about the other places to visit for food in German Village? Yeah. Last period, Christian Swincher said this is his first pumpkin show. I was like, right? Like if you haven't experienced it yet, do you know where the Schmitz booth is? The pumpkin show on Sather Street across from Ballones Insurance. Some of you don't even know where that is. Like, you know where the main stage is, where they do the Queen stuff, right? It's like very close to there. Cream puffs, kielbasa, German sausage, and Polish too. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Like, and that place is have you ever been to Thurman's? 2 weeks ago, right? You got to get there early because the line is out the end, right? What did you eat there? Did you get was that the big one, the challenge?
No, it's Terminator.
The Terminator. Like if you can eat the Terminator, they give it to you for free, I think, and then you get a T-shirt. Like that, I weighed 275 pounds just not too long ago, and I can't do it. So, right? Ethnic enclaves because these places are places that there's other people like you, and they you live with people of your kind, right? And basically, what this is trying to say is that immigration and internal migration and industrialization and urbanization are all kind of mixed together into this big mess of. And when I say mess, there's a lot of awesome stuff about cities. I love New York City. I love Columbus. But especially during this time, these are some of the things that Americans had to deal with. These are problems that Americans had to deal with. And I would like to not talk about them now, just want to introduce them to you real quick. Can you just write them down real quick? My plan is hopefully tomorrow we'll have time. To go over these. They were problems that urbanization brought in these areas. And I would like for you tomorrow to look at what the problems were and then what the solutions were that people came up with during this time. So that's urbanization, and urbanization is really fueled by immigration and internal migration, right? Okay, everybody good? Everybody, right, go on. Now, there were a lot of reform movements during this time period. There are a lot of people who saw things that were going on and they wanted to see change. One example that we'll get to in a couple weeks is populism. But when we're talking about the immigrants in the inner cities, the big cities, the social gospel movement was an attempt at reform, changing how we deal with these people. And it not only immigrants, but also the urban poor in general. Now, when you think of the word gospel, what religion should you be thinking of? Christianity. You should be thinking of Christianity. Gospel means good news, the good news of Jesus, right? And two of these people in the social gospel movement are were pastors, they're preachers. Walter Rauschenbusch had what a great name. Rauschenbusch, perfect German name, right? Was a pastor in Hell's Kitchen, which is a neighborhood in New York City. If you think of Hell's Kitchen as being that TV show where that angry British guy yelled at people who were cooking, that kind of a play off of this. Like Hell's Kitchen was a really messy neighborhood, and he was a preacher. We will see what he preached. Washington Gladden was actually from Columbus, Ohio, and he was like the main preacher of the social gospel movement. He had the Congregationalist Church on Broad Street in Columbus, which you can still go there today and visit it. We'll look at Jane Addams in just a minute. And what these two guys especially did was say, basically, they didn't worry as much about preaching about you're a sinner, you're going to hell kind of thing. They were more about if Jesus healed the sick and fed the hungry, then we should too. We should practice what we preach in that regard. And so they were focused more on good works and good deeds, especially for immigrants and urban people. Their ideas weren't just religious, though. There were also some economic ideas that they had. Profit sharing is one of the things that comes from the social gospel movement that I think is a pretty good addition to our economic way of thinking. So there are two extremes in this world, right? There's this one extreme over here where the robber barons are greedy and jerks, and they get all these profits and they put it all in their pockets and they keep it all for themselves, and they might give a couple scraps to the working class guy, right? That's one extreme. And I don't really think that exists in its purest form, right? There's this other extreme over here where the people who are communists want to get rid of all rich people and sometimes have children, right? A bloodbath, right? And then the workers will own everything together. They'll share everything together. And there'll be no rich and there'll be no poor. There'll just all be a bunch of middle class people, right, who are owning everything together. This is like a middle of the road approach. It's saying, profit sharing is saying, that you don't give everything to them and you don't give everything to them. If a company makes $1 million of profit in a year, it doesn't go his pocket 100%, right? You share it. He gets the biggest portion because he's managing everything, but they also get the percentage of that money too, because they were the ones who helped make the stuff, right? Doesn't that seem like a decent compromise between the two? And so now, if you want to work for a corporation that engages in profit sharing, there are several of them out there. You can just Google it and see if that's, you want to work for them. Now, as a corollary, as an addition, as a kind of a going alongside of the social gospel movement, we've got the settlement house movement. The settlement houses were essentially another version of the YMCA. Now, that might sound a little bit strange, because when you think about YMCA, what do you think about? But you think of the song, right? The song never tells us what YMCA stands for. They tell us how to do it. What's YMCA stand for? Young Men's Christian Association. See the Christian in there. See the YMCA here actually used to have Bible verses. I think they stopped doing that because they don't want to offend non-Christians that come in. But the point is that YMCA's used to be not just places for working out. There was that, but there are also places where you could stay if you needed an emergency place to live for a few days. Without clothing, food, soup kitchens, bread lines, teaching immigrants how to learn English and job skills and so on and so forth. And the settlement house movement was very much that as well, but maybe not as religious in its goal. Just a couple of things that settlement house would do that. Help immigrants learn English, other job skills, even provide some early forms of health insurance and medicine for people. The name that you should associate with this is up a little bit higher. It's the Jane Addams name. If you want to circle her name and draw it down there, she actually will win a Nobel Peace Prize eventually for her roles in humanitarian work, like this place. Her famous settlement house was the Hull House in Chicago. If I was a good teacher, I would have pictures of the Hull House up here. but I'm not, so I don't. You can Google it if you want. Now, those places sound awesome. They sound like they're doing good stuff. They're not asking for a lot in return, right? They're not asking for anything in return. They're just doing things out of the goodness of their heart to help out immigrants. We get here, and we have a little bit more of a mixed bag. Political machines are very efficient and very effective and very powerful, and they do a lot of good, but they're also very corrupt. A political machine, when I say machine, I don't mean like a thing with gears and pulleys and belts and you flip a switch and it turns on. It's not a machine like that. It's an organization that runs like a well-oiled machine. It's an organization of people. And they are almost always controlling a political party, either in a city or a state. And it's kind of like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll get you a job. I'll make sure your kids are taken care of. I'll get you coal in winter. You get education, etc. You have to vote for who I tell you to vote for. How they were structured was a city political machine was run by what was called a city boss. The boss was at the top of the pyramid, and most of the times, this boss, I mean, you can think of him as like the godfather of the mafia, right? That's kind of a good parallel. This is before the mafia, but you get the gist. That he controls everything important in the city. Now, underneath him, cities are divided up into sections called wards, and so there would be a ward boss in charge of a section of the city, a smaller section, and then they would report to him. And they would be in charge of their, have like almost absolute power over their section of the city, their ward. And these bosses were so powerful that the ward bosses and the city bosses would control jobs across the city. They would control, as you'll see in the next couple slides, police and fire departments and so on and so forth. And you did what the boss said or else. If you voted for who they told you to vote for, if you supported the machine, then all was well and your life was fine. And if you decided to show a little bit of independence, then, you could lose the place you're renting. Right? Maybe the police come by and rough you up a little bit. Maybe they kill you. There's a little bit of a mafia flavor to this. And so I've already kind of talked about that real quick. Even though the city boss is not the mayor, it's like the mayor's the puppet and the city boss is the political, like the marionette. No, the marionette is the puppet, right? The puppet master, the guy pulling the strings, right? And so really, he's in charge of these things. If you want your business to go well, then you get in good with the city boss. But look at all the good that they did. I mean, this is America, right? Like, it seems like in America, there's people in organizations do a lot of good stuff, but you've got to take some of the bad with it, like Facebook. And just paying attention to the whistleblower stuff. Right? It just seems like that's America. We can't have something that's really just good. You know why that's probably why Batman is our favorite superhero? Because he's a flawed superhero. They had a Superman reboot, 2004, something like that, and it flopped big time. You know why? Because Superman was too good. We don't want to watch things that are too good because this is our reality, right? There's never something that's just totally good. What do you think? Graft is another way of saying if you are engaging in graft, then you are using your power for corrupt means. A kickback is a form of graft where you can get some money by overcharging the government. Here's how it would work. You make spray bottles in your factory, right? And I am the city boss, and the mayor of the city said, we need like 2,000 spray bottles for our janitors, okay? So I go to you, and I say, how much for you want per bottle? And you say, $3. $10. Right?
Yes.
Right? And then I get you the contract for 2,000 at $10 a piece, and you get the money, yay! And then I ask you for a kickback, which means some of that cheddar. You call it cheese. Guac, is that what you said? Right? Cheese, right? Like, you give me $1 a bottle of that. That's kickback, right? Win-win. The only people who lose are the taxpayers. And there's also often an election fraud. Vote early and often. People voting multiple times, stuffing the ballot box. You think that our election, people say our elections are rigged. People say, but like they were rigged back in the late 1800s, right? And at the heart of this, the reason why this works, the power comes from these this wave of immigrants coming in who are willing to do what the boss asks and vote the way the boss asks because they're getting so much in return. And if it wasn't for all these immigrants being part of the machine, being exploited by the political machines, then this thing wouldn't have worked very well. But it did. Now, let me put a face to this whole thing. Let's get into a person's story now. The most famous or infamous city boss in American history is going to come from, of course, the most famous city in American history, New York. And his name was William Marcy Tweed. We call him Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed. And it's probably this should say 1869. My apologies. And it probably lasted more than those 3 years. Like most of his career, he was taking money, overcharging city government money, getting kickbacks from people. But the price tag that the New York Times put it at was like $100 million that he sold back, which today would be like $2 billion or more. And he had immigrants. His immigrants voted Democrat because he was a Democrat. Really, ever since then, the Democratic Party has been the party of immigration. And the Republicans, because they put those know-nothing nativist people into their party, has pretty much ever since then been the party of not helping immigration. It took one man, because everybody knew that what Tweed was doing was wrong. But it took one man standing up and saying, enough's enough. Let's change it. And the person who brought him down was Thomas Nast, who was a political cartoonist. He brought him down with cartoons. Now, look at the pyramid. Let's just make sure that you're understanding. Okay? Who's at the top of the political machine? Not the name of Boss Tweed, but like what was his position? City boss goes up here. Can you please put city boss up here? Make sure that you're understanding how this is organized. What's the next run down? Ward bosses. And the base? Immigrants. Immigrants are at the base. Now, this might be a little laggy. I do apologize if it's a little laggy, but when I have the screencast going, it kind of makes it laggy. Will you please turn to the movie sheet? I want you right now, if you will, to define political machine in your own words, please. I'm going to come around and look at it and just see what you think. How are you describing political machine? And you should have the word immigrant and corrupt. Not immigrants are corrupt, but in there. Then Tammany Hall, number 2, Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was the name of the political machine in New York City, named after an Indian chief named Tammany. So write down your definition of number 1. What do you think a political machine is? Put it in your own words. Then, number 2, Tammany Hall was the New York political machine.
These Washington rumbling hoped it would connect, would have to descend into a maelstrom of political and financial chaos, and rise again.
America is known as a country of enthusiasm and optimism, of a can-do spirit of engineering. New York was built on this can-do spirit of engineering. But New York is also a place of corruption. And so it's a place where people know that sometimes the bureaucracy will let you down, that you have to grease somebody's palm So there's a different relationship to venality, to moral iniquity, more of an acceptance of it. That this is what people are like, you know? They're not perfect, they're not angelic.
To be a citizen of New York is a disgrace. The New Yorker belongs to a community worse governed by lower and baser blackguard scum than any city in Western Christendom. George Templeton Strong. In the summer of 1871, as work on the Brooklyn Bridge began, New York City exploded in the biggest political scandal of its history. At the center of the storm stood another structure, only 100 yards away from the New York entrance to the bridge. An unfinished stone courthouse that by 1871 was entering its 12th year of construction with no end in sight.
Not City Hall.
The revelations about to emerge from it would show how politics worked in the sprawling commercial metropolis. They would also immortalize one man above all as the most corrupt urban politician in American history, Boss William M. Tweed. If New York was going to have corruption, if New York was going to have a corrupt politician, it was going to have the biggest and most corrupt of anybody. And he was new. He was a new kind of corrupt politician. That too was part of it.
Boss Tweed, the name is associated with purely bad things now. The Tammany organization really was one of those local shady organizations that also did do a lot of good things for the people they were supposed to be representing.
For years, a new kind of political organization had been rising from the streets of the Lower East Side. It was called Tammany Hall, and the men who ran it had few illusions, no ideology, and no ideals. What they had was a shrewd grasp of the new political opportunities in the sprawling city of immigrants. Reaching out to New York's despised and downtrodden Irish and German newcomers, Tammany alone offered them comfort and a voice in the system, knowing that on election day, they would reap the gratitude of the new voters.
People who just off the boat, who are looking to make a way in the world, Tammany provided them with, an awful lot of real services. In these days, when so many people needed help, your kid's in trouble with the law, or your child's not doing well in school, you can't pay the rent, your husband's out of work, or your husband has just died, you're about to be evicted, you're looking for a job. Any of these kinds of things require the intervention of someone. And for an awful lot of people, that someone or something was Tammany, or the local Tammany leader.
Nothing was as famous as Tammany Hall. No American political figure has ever been quite as famous or as infamous as Boss Tweed. But we need to remember why it was that the political machine had such attraction to these immigrants.
An ex-fireman and one-time chairmaker from the Lower East Side, there had never been anyone quite like William M. Tweed. Over 6 feet tall and nearly 300 pounds, he was surprisingly nimble and graceful on his feet. Caricatured by his Republican opponents as a vulgar, hard-drinking Irishman, he was in fact a fourth-generation Scots Protestant, unfailingly courteous and nearly teetotal.
Which means he did not drink.
He was also a superb politician who took care of his mainly immigrant constituency, providing jobs for the unemployed, coal in winter, and orphanages, hospitals, and shelters for the poor.
He was one of the first people who saw the power of mass politics in the cities. And for all his thievery, there was the recognition of mobilizing this mass of people to some political end. I think he's not remembered for that. He's remembered for the $50 million that he stole, which if you wanted to get the equivalent today, multiply times 10.
Accelerating New York's already explosive growth still further, Tweed and his associates brazenly siphoned off staggering sums from the hundreds of city projects under their control, and helped robber barons like Jay Gould and Jim Fisk make off with still more. There were lucrative contracts for grateful builders who happily paid Tammany's leaders enormous cash kickbacks to get them. There were thousands of jobs for Tammany's loyal constituents who gratefully voted Tammany's leaders back in power. New York's upper classes, meanwhile, professed to be appalled, but quietly looked the other way as real estate values in the city skyrocketed. It all worked like a machine.
There's a statue of
political
Tammany.
machine. And no one knew how that machine worked better than William Tweed, who by 1870 had concentrated more power in himself than anyone in the city's history.
It was Tweed who helped maneuver the money through the city council or the board of aldermen, as what that was, for the Brooklyn Bridge, for Central Park, for a lot of the road repair and the creation of streets and avenues in uptown Manhattan. Now, he made a lot of money with that, and it was absolutely corrupt.
Tweed's first position as Commissioner of Public Works, he was no fool. And if you know where the sewer lines are gonna go, and if you know where the new street extensions are gonna be opened up, and you get there first, and you buy up that territory, all you gotta do is sit back, wait, and boom, the price explodes. So Tweed, in fact, became one of the largest real estate owners in the city.
I think there was something in him, some overpowering appetite that he could never slake. He couldn't have one mistress, he had to have two. He couldn't have one roast beef, he had to have four, and he couldn't have two judges, he had to have them all. And finally he caught up with them and destroyed them.
In 1870, as newspaper editors and indignant reformers began questioning where Tweed's lavish lifestyle came from, all eyes turned to the still unfinished county courthouse on Chambers Street, a special project of Tweed's. Begun in 1858, it was supposed to have cost $350,000. 12 years later, the price tag had reached $13 million and kept right on rising.
It's number 4.
Somewhere on this one building, which is actually quite a nice building, wound up costing more than the entire Houses of Parliament. Well, the deal is straightforward. We want to buy a lot of chairs. How much does that chair cost? Let's say $5. Now, says Tweed, $5. You mean $50? Oh, I do. All right. And, give me the chair, $50, 20 back for you, and so forth.
Even the most worldly New Yorkers knew that something had to be done. People begin to tire of holding their noses, George Templeton Strong wrote, and are looking about in a helpless way for some remedy.
No caliph,
Now,
Khan, or Caesar
It's okay
has risen
right
to
now
power or opulence
to
more
stop
rapidly
writing
than Tweed the First.
and just look at these
10 years
cartoons by
ago,
Thomas
this
Nast. I
monarch
want you
was
to look
pursuing
at
the
them.
humble occupation of a chairmaker. He now rules the state as Napoleon ruled France. There is absolutely nothing in the city which is beyond the reach of the insatiable gang who have obtained possession of it. The New York Times.
In 1869, a German-born artist named Thomas Nast, with close ties to the Republican Party, began publishing a series of political cartoons in Harper's Weekly. Week after week, Nast relentlessly excoriated what he called the Tammany Hall ring. There was Peter Brains Sweeney, the city treasurer, Mayor Abraham Oakey Hall, Tweed's puppet in City Hall, Richard Slippery Dick Conley, the comptroller,
Look at their Pope hats they're
and
wearing.
Boss
Pope.
Tweed himself, who Nast depicted
Comment
as a
about their
licentious,
Catholicness.
balding, overfed monster, literally devouring the city. I don't care a straw for newspaper articles, Tweed declared. My constituents don't know how to read, but they can't help seeing them damn pictures.
Stop laughing at
He
that.
was the object of one of the most successful campaigns by a political cartoonist in history. Thomas Nast really did the most extraordinary job of attacking Tweed and exposing the Tweed ring in Harper's Weekly. Those pictures will live forever. The way you can never separate Nixon from Woodward and Bernstein, you can't separate Tweed from Thomas Nast. They're wed together for the rest of history, I guess.
On July 8th, 1871, the New York Times joined the fray, publishing excerpts from secret courthouse records obtained from a disgruntled city official. Tweed had cheated out of thousands of dollars in kickbacks. The figures were astonishing. 11 thermometers had been purchased for $7,500, dust brooms for $41,000. One contractor had been paid $5.5 million for window shades, carpets, and furniture. It would never be clear how much Tweed's corruption had been exaggerated by the press. The New York Times put the final tally at almost $200 million. But in the end, it didn't matter. New York needed a villain equal in scale to its giant park and giant bridge, and Tweed fit the bill, in part because he simply looked the part.
He ended up a sad, tragic figure.
All right.
Because he basically took the fall for a system.
Please bring that back tomorrow because I want to tell you the end of the story. It's really cool.
The so-called respectable people, the Ghouls and Fisks and all the guys who were not really indicted for the things that Tweed ended up taking the fall for.
On December 15, 1871, Boss Tweed was indicted on 3 counts of fraud and grand larceny, and 2 months later, 220 misdemeanor charges. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and those convictions were later overturned. A civil suit stripped him of his assets and forced him into prison. Gaunt and ailing, he eked out his last years in jail. In the winter of 1875, he somehow slipped past his guards and escaped to Spain, but he was quickly recaptured and returned to prison. The Spanish police, it was later said, had recognized him from one of Thomas Nast's cartoons. On April 12, 1878, he died of pneumonia in his cell in the Ludlow Street jail he himself had built, penniless and broken.
He gets a lot of the blame, probably that belongs to a lot more people who we think of as legitimate politicians. There are other bosses that had a smoother style. I think part of the reason that people remember Boss Tweed so much was that he was so flamboyant, and by the time of his downfall, he was such a leftover from another age.
A villain with more brains would have had a modest dwelling and guzzled in secret. His successors here will not imitate him in this, but that he will have successors, there is no doubt.